So I'm going to start, since the heading of this year's Subversive Festival carries the word democracy in its title, and let us first pinpoint the meaning of democracy and what it really stands for in capitalism. So in capitalist states, of course, democracy has always been the concept and the actual rule of government connected with the moneyed and propertied classes, while the seemingly diverse party system has functioned only as a smokescreen for promoting the interests of different fractions of the same property owning elite. And of course, insistence on patriarchy and gendered exploitation also falls into the context of Western capitalist democracies. So with the destruction of socialism and also, we might say, the reimposition of capitalist social relations and reinstallment of the so-called social democracy, what we are facing today are very intense processes of women's redomestication and, of course, repatriarchalization of society, and all of this takes place under the pretext of women's or women-friendly policies. Let us first explain what the conjunction between capitalism and patriarchy is. Capitalism has always been, of course, dependent on gendered exploitation of women, and it is for this reason that capitalism also keeps reinventing patriarchy alongside constructs of femininity and masculinity, regardless of the different forms that capitalism itself might take, be it neoliberalism or its earlier stages. So feminization of poverty, as today's dictation goes, is not something that comes along with neoliberalism, but of course it has always been entrenched in different kinds of capitalist versions of the breadwinner model. So capitalism has consistently reconceptualized the burden of care for children, and also by extension for the elderly, the sick and the disabled, as something that is associated solely and entirely with individuals. So this individualism is not just a matter of neoliberalism, it has always been part and parcel of capitalism as such. So capitalism primarily rests on the redefinition of social reproductive work as a matter of private and individual concern, always private and individual concern rather than social and collective responsibility. So this kind of redefinition enables capital owners to cast aside their social responsibility, but of course this means they would actually in this way dispense with huge but essential costs that are necessary for the basic reproduction and regular upkeep of the current and future labour force. So it is for this reason that within capitalist framework, women are posited as a specially designated group of people who should do this kind of social reproductive work out of love and for free in the privacy of their homes, supposedly as a natural extension of their assigned femininity. And of course, once again, this kind of redefinition of social reproductive work as women's free labour and personal service allows capital owners to download and in this way avoid huge financial costs associated with the reproduction and maintenance of their own labour force, which of course in turn translates into a direct increase in their own private wealth. So disinvestment in social reproduction means a direct accumulation of capital, of course. With the reinstallment of capitalism, what we are witnessing, of course, is precisely this, a major disinvestment on the part of newly fledged capital owners in the social reproduction of humanity and their current and future labour force. And this translates also in reduced paternal and maternity leave allowances, but also in either in a retrenchment or a complete dismantling of public care facilities, be it for the elderly and primarily for the children. So in this way, by downloading social reproduction as non-work, by redefining this as non-work, it means that women are being once again constructed as primarily home-confined domestic carers and services, And at the same time, with this disinvestment into public care facilities, they are also being reconstructed as secondary earners. So primarily free care providers, and at the same time only secondary earners. So women are pushed back into the privacy of homes in various ways, so primarily either as informal carers or free reproductive labourers, and only by extension as secondary workers in the labour market. So today what we are witnessing are intense processes and trends towards pushing women into specially designated allotted job positions like part-time work and of course home-based industrial or for that reason service work. And this of course leads to the feminization of poverty. But in the meantime, capitalist states have instituted a new version of liberal feminism. This is the kind of feminism which of course does not question the system as such, but primarily acts as an aid to these policies, like for example the maintenance, the promotion of part-time jobs and industrial homework and so on. Primarily we are talking about the NGOization of feminism, which of course is also sooner or later in this geopolitical place here, it's going to be specialized in microcredits, in giving out microcredits just as well. So one of the major premises of liberal feminism is either the focus on the quotas, and it does not actually ask which women are capable of entering these positions at all. So considering that we are talking about the retrenchment or dismantling of social services, the privatization of care in a double sense, in the sense that low-income women are being pushed out of the labour market entirely, with the remaining social services like kindergartens being exorbitantly priced and very much reduced in number. The network has been dismantled and reduced in number, so this creates a scarcity, but at the same time inaccessibility in terms of prices that are charged even in public facilities. So the idea is to track women into two kind of categories. So on the one hand, you have low-income women who exit the labour market primarily because of the inaccessibility of childcare facilities, either because of their reduction in number or because of their price inaccessibility. And on the other hand, and these women are then encouraged to take on part-time jobs or actually home-based or industrial work, and this is also the policy that is now going to be pursued in Croatia. At the same time, maternity leaves and parental leave allowances are no longer count for 100% replacement of a woman's wage, but they have been minimalized in various ways. Either they are paid at in a flat rate component, which of course is like subsistence level, and this means that when women actually take out these leaves, they are at least partially dependent upon their partners. So we are witnessing this double tracking. So on the one hand, women coming from the financially underprivileged environment, that they are channeled into this, whereas upper class women and these are the policies now introduced with individual childminders, will be able actually to download the costs of reproduction to the informal sector primarily. So, but when it comes to this liberal feminisms, of course, NGOs come in handy just as well, because they serve a double function. So on the one hand, they function as a poor substitute for the shrinking and disappearing welfare state, whose provisions have been decimated, and increasingly services are being provided much more cheaply by NGOs with the array of volunteers and only a small crew of professional technical staff. So NGOs are encouraged to take on care work just as well. For example, if we take a look at Latin America, or other kind of social services just as well. And of course, secondly, behind this process of NGOization lurks also the depoliticization and, in a way, neutralization of potential grassroots movements of those who have been dispossessed, and who might develop clearly defined political genders that challenge the status quo had it not been for the imposition of the NGO's strategies. But what we are going to witness in our place here is very likely that NGOs, women's NGOs, will also take on the so-called microcredit services, or actually they will become intermediaries between the banking sector and, of course, the locally impoverished women who have been either let go from the public sector and so on. So microcredit lending also comes into picture right here. And of course, microcredit lending is directed towards women who in one way or another have been let go. So, and this is touted as, once again, as a women-friendly policy, as a way to empower women, but despite of this gloss of women's empowerment, and of course with the retreat of the welfare state and also the shrinking employment opportunities for women in the public sector, the goal is primarily to push women into, once again, informal sector work. And this leads to a stepping up of women's domestic and childcare duties with the unpaid work environment, within this unpaid work environment of their home, while it also restricts their demands for fair wages once women, of course, are relocated from the so-called formal sector into a semi-informal or highly informal sector. So the underpaid labour of these poor entrepreneurs who are in one way or another aided by being able to access microcredits. So the underpaid labour of these poor entrepreneurs is made available to subcontractors usually, or to some other intermediaries that operate on behalf of huge retail and other corporate chains, or just individual private companies. So, and under the pretext of women's empowerment and this humanitarian assistance, which is extended by NGOs in conjunction with the banking sector, women are once again incorporated into the capitalist system of gendered exploitation, once again primarily via home-based work. And that's why it is also important to divest ourselves from these chains of capitalist organization of civil society. This is very important. So what we need, in fact, is a socially engaged feminism, the kind of feminism that itself would be focused on structural inequalities and, of course, systematic exploitation. So this is not about trying to focus on individual separate issues, but understanding the system as a whole. So what we need is a systematic approach. And that's why it is of essential importance for feminism itself to become rematerialized. In other words, to become socially engaged is to think about alternatives which are not just reformist, but transformative and actually run in opposition and above capitalism. So that's why feminism needs to get rematerialized, in the sense that it must understand that any kind of struggles, meaningful struggles against injustices, are struggles against imperialism. They are struggles against the systematic exploitation, and that's why this is a struggle that needs to do away with the structures of the capitalist society itself. What has the effect is already this, namely the concept of remodified family wage, and of course the concept of the breadwinner model. It's not gone. People have in mind that the breadwinner model means only the woman stays at home and the partner works. Not at all. So part-timing and this kind of home-based work is a form of supplementary labour and supplementary pay. That's why women are constructed as secondary earners. So the breadwinner model is not gone. It is remodified as a 1.5 model, we say, whereby the woman actually earns only half of what she would actually earn if she had full labour rights, so to say, and access to the market. But before we get down to this, to the answer to this question, which is a typical question that unionists, for example, would pose, we have to understand that the concept of the family wage is also directly related to the shedding of social reproduction maintenance costs on the part of the capitalists, because they say, well, social reproduction is something that will be done in the privacy and consequently does not need any kind of payment, and consequently also the wages of men, working partners, are lower as a result of that. So there is a direct correlation. So the family wage then means whatever the partner earns, it's never, for the majority of the people, it's never sufficient enough. The notion of the family wage is a myth, because it means that people would still have to supplement the minimal income with some additional activities in order to reach the basic minimum standard of living. So that's why if we look back in history, when family wages would be paid, children would have to go out to work immediately as soon as possible in order to supplement the income of the father. So the myth of the family wage, all of this is connected. But of course, the idea is not that women suppress the wages of the men. On the contrary, it's the systematic organization of different kind of segregated neighbor power and differentially valorized neighbor power, which all of these factors intermesh. And we must not forget about the huge reserve army of the unemployed, be it men or women, who actually keep suppressing the wages just as well. So sometimes people would say, oh, it is a typical, I would even say it's a typical focus of unionists. This was a typical focus of the unionists in the 1920s and the 1930s, who would put up resistance against the broader inclusion of women into the labor force by trying to defend the separate interests of the men, and this would actually result in artificial divisions between men and women versus actually looking at the system as a whole. So that's why socialism versus guild unions. So this is an artificial opposition, right? And it was counted upon, it was highly boosted actually, so as to really further to exclude women also from trade unionism just as well. It depends on the course of action and thinking that individual unions would take, but this was primarily what was entrenched with the main unions, the unions that will also recognize the social partners, even though this word was not actually used at the time. In fact, they will not really recognize the social partners proper, but this was the direction. Probably you mean this mantra that after the Second World War, with the advance of technology and so on, this would also, if this is one of the typical arguments presented, that women would be liberated from the household chores and they would also be able to enter the labor force. But they never discussed that women after the Second World War in capitalism, if they entered the labor force, it was under the restricted conditions and primarily once again as part-timers. So, on the one hand, state capitalism would also promote a particular kind of a welfare state. So we have to also differentiate between different types of welfare state, because it's not just all about production, the way the production itself is organized and how surplus neighbor, of course, all this income is actually divided. It also has to do with the organization of the social welfare state. And in capitalism, we differentiate between three different types, but the main distinction is that liberal welfare states would target selective groups. For example, among women, they would target only the poorest among the poor and provide some sort of alleviation, which is an extension of the old charity or noblesse largesse system. On the other hand, you have the so-called corporate conservative system, typical of Central Europe, like Germany and Austria, whereby incentives would be given in the form of marital tax relief, for example, for the woman to stay at home or to have only so and so much income in comparison to the men, which was what was directly encouraged by these incentives, and stipends just as well, like child allowances and so on, would be to to still keep the breadwinner model going, and these kind of incentives would be a minimal loss of capital for the capital owners in comparison to the erection of an extensive and of course working public system whereby people would be also employed on a full-time basis. So state capitalism, this kind of social services that are promulgated as a sort of a New Deal, and the New Deal policies just as well, would not actually improve the situation of women. They would just reorganize the breadwinner model, and once again the tendency is always to shed the costs of reproduction. So socialism, on the other hand, would provide full individual rights, so pension rights, health insurance and so on. So state capitalism, on the one hand, even though policies are modified and they are governed by the central bureaucracy, so to say, this is still the extension of the corporate and capitalist system. So with the smashing of this welfare state, what we are witnessing is further reduction in already minimal or medium social allocations, which never ever worked towards the full citizenship, for example, on the part of women. So state capitalism versus socialism, even those who say what we need today is Keynesianism, do not realize that Keynesianism helped once again just to keep capitalism going, and it is in no way applicable to socialism. And those who actually promote or actually talk about the New Deal, for example, as a sort of an alleviation that would keep capitalism and made it like state capitalism, because in the United States the Roosevelt policies are interpreted as a form of state capitalism. People who do not know the history of this New Deal do not know that the employment rate was kept high because women had to leave their posts. Women had to leave their posts, and nowadays we have exactly the same kind of a reflection of this, for example, in the sense that parental leaves are being deliberately extended so that women are kept out of the labor force, and they count as the unemployment statistics go down because these kind of policies, they are interpreted, parental leaves are interpreted as a form of employment. Yeah, so this is state capitalism for you. Because we have to, I'm not talking just about the means of production, I'm talking about the organization of the so-called social welfare system, which in capitalism has functioned as a form of cooptation and Bismarck would also say this explicitly. So we have to give some concessions, not many, and we have to give targeted concessions so that we co-opt certain segments, primarily middle class and upper middle class, so that it actually works in alliance with the capitalist state. And the idea was to nip in the bud, so to say, potentially revolutionary movements that would actually require a complete change of the system and justice rather than cooptation. So we have to understand state capitalism is not parallel to socialism by no means. And I have provided just a few fragments of an insight into this, but what is required is actually a much more extensive explanation.